This is the Chicks of Fintwit, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook. Join me as I highlight female trailblazers and their male allies across the industry as each shares their expertise on a variety of finance topics. Nothing is off limits. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode.
All opinions expressed by Caitlin Cook and the Chicks of Fintwit podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of the host or any of their affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only, is not investment advice, and should not be relied upon for any investment decisions. We are not recommending any securities, nor is this an offer or sale of a security.
Hello and welcome to the Chicks of Fintwit podcast, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook, otherwise known as Dead Kate Bounce on Twitter. And this is a bittersweet episode of the podcast simply because it is our last. This is the farewell episode of the Chicks of Fintwit podcast. And I can get a little bit more into, why that is, but want to let our two guests introduce themselves because it only makes sense that my last episode of the podcast includes two of my favorite chicks of Fintwit that I've become really great friends with, both Elena and Nicole. Both of you welcome to the podcast, and I'll let you introduce yourselves. We'll start with Nicole.
Hey, Caitlin. Okay, so excited to be back, to be here. I've grown so much since you interviewed me for the first time on Chicks of Fintwit. It feels so long ago. But yes, I'm Nicole Casperson. I am the founder and host of What the FinTech. It is a newsletter subscribed to now over 20,000 industry professionals where I cover the fintech space with a focus on inclusion and bringing more equity to society and financial systems. I also host a podcast now called Humans of FinTech, just kicked off season 2, episode 1. And that's me in a nutshell.
Love it. Elena, your turn.
Yes, I'm so excited for this conversation with some of my favorite chicks of Fintwit. But I am Elena Kreisnow. I am the editorial manager and brand evangelist for Street Cred PR. And I'm just really excited to kick this off and get into it, ladies.
I'm so excited for it. Yeah. So as I mentioned, just quick caveat here. So this is the last episode of the Chicks of Fintwit podcast, but I'm not done. I can't get rid of me that easily. So really more of a pivot. So working in crypto for the past year or so, I've just found that there's a real lack of people who are able to distill what is seemingly so complex and foreign to people, new technology, pretty much a different language, into something that's easy to understand. And that creates really big barriers to entry for people who want to get involved. If you're not working in the space 24/7 and you don't have skin in the game, it's a little bit difficult to really wrap your head around. And it's hard to wrap your head around working in the space, I could say as well. So really want to, pivot to covering more in crypto, Web3, DeFi, that entire arena, because in my past year or so, I have primarily been working on running a crypto education platform and educating financial advisors who have otherwise had no background in the space and getting them up to speed. I've loved it. And I've met a lot of really good people along the way. So that's what's to come in the future here. We're going to have a new name for the podcast and get started on things here pretty shortly. TBD, I'll keep everyone updated. But again, really want to wrap this up by bringing it all together. I've had some great conversations with women across the financial services industry, and it's definitely not something I've taken for granted. I've gotten to talk to so many people that I never thought I'd have conversations with. I've made really good friends from it, Nicole included as a previous guest. And I think I really want to, pay tribute to that before stepping into the next chapter here and getting a little bit more into Web3 and where my interests lie specifically. So lots to cover here, but happy to have two of my really good girlfriends on here. Nicole have not met in person. Actually, either of you.
A travesty, a true travesty.
Elena and I just met. We just met. And it is, I was telling you, and we had this conversation at ETF Exchange with like Shauna and some of the folks that were there.
Oh, yes.
And we're talking about how, the word catfish is when you like someone online and then you meet them in real life and you don't like them. They're not who they say they are. We need the opposite of catfish. Like, what's the opposite word of that? Where you know someone so well online, like all of us, and then you meet them in real life and you love them even more. We need
Yes.
Dictionary.
And we actually even looked into the origin of that a little bit. And I guess the term catfishing in part comes from fishermen used to swap out catfish for codfish because cod was what the buyer wanted. And so Nicole and I were playing with like, is cod fishing the right word? Like when you are the fish, you should be.
Right? Maybe that is it. It's cod fishing.
You heard it here first. You heard it here first. Oh my gosh. Well, that's such a good place to start too, right? Because one of the reasons I wanted to start the podcast to begin with, and I think it was well over a year ago now at this point, which is crazy. Time flies. But one of the main reasons was because as a woman in finance myself, it was really hard outside of Twitter to meet women in the industry. But when I did, they were fantastic. There's just not that many of them. And I also think that looking at a lot of podcasts and live shows that you see in the industry, you get a lot of repeat guests, and those guests are of a similar demographic, similar gender, similar background, right? Which is totally fine. They're good in their own right. There's a reason that they're repeat guests on these shows, and they're brilliant. They're great at what they do. But that's not to say that there aren't a lot of women in the space who don't get that recognition. So what I wanted to do was really open up a conversation and introduce some really great women in business to the world on my podcast and give them a platform to talk about what they're doing and their experiences and really give them the platform that they deserve and help them towards that. So that was the start of it. But Twitter for all three of us, I'd say, right? And we can all talk about that, has been a really big way of not only networking, but just building friendships, building connections. I have my job at OnRamp was through Twitter. I've made most of my closest friends from Twitter in real life and virtually. And there's a lot of merit to the platform as a whole. I'm super thankful that I had a college professor who told me to get involved in it in college and gave me the nudge and said it'd be something I'm interested in. And here we are. It's paid off and I've loved it. So would love to hear from both of you on your journeys into Twitter and, what the benefits that you've seen from it and why you'd encourage other people to get involved.
Well, I would just say that I'm so glad that we're having this conversation and I get to be on this particular episode because, Caitlin, as I've shared with you personally many times, the Chicks of Fintwit was really like the gateway drug, so to speak, for me into finance. It allowed me to understand things a lot better that were really complex to me, coming from a completely different industry, coming into finance fully with, a background that was on the other side of the spectrum. And just the way that you were able to break down what each of your guests actually does and also create space for women and talk about the experience of women gave me something to really connect to. And Nicole, your episode on Chicks of Fintwit was one of the things that also really connected me to you after listening to it and being like, oh, this girl is it. She's legit. I'm just like so grateful that you took on that mission and you did it so well. And I think Twitter for women especially is, at least from my experience, has just been an absolute game changer as far as making connections, feeling supported, having a network, and creating opportunities for yourself in this space, which wasn't created for us, but we're all working to rebuild it to make it for us all.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human. And I think, especially with what we've all been through because of the pandemic, any kind of extra human connection we can create and community we can build is critical to our success, to our happiness, to building, the lives that we want to lead. And as that seems so monumental, but Twitter does play a very critical role in that, to be able to, have a place where someone is tagging me and being supportive, or, sharing some piece of information I never heard before, or, hey, you should check out this founder. They really deserve more of a platform. And I make that connection. I love the saying that we should be building longer tables or longer bridges instead of higher walls. And that really just resonates with me so much, because that's really what Twitter has the ability to do is build those longer tables and create more seats at the table, and in such a non-traditional way, which is really cool. One of the things, separate from Twitter, but one of the things, Caitlin, that I bet maybe you experienced, so I used to content produce Her Success Matters before I embarked on What the FinTech, and it was a super successful, very female-oriented podcast. I think that the work I did behind the scenes to prep the guest was probably the biggest impact I could have had working on that show, because like I wasn't even the host, right? But I prepped the guests, I talked to them, I did the questions. 99% of the time, those guests that would come on would be nervous, terrified. Like, hi, I've never shared my story in my life. And these are all women in finance. Some of them, on Twitter, like they would be just terrified and I'd have to talk them through it. And it's hard. Like it's hard so I think when we think about like, yes, there aren't as many, women out there, but there's also, and then take that even smaller to the amount of women that want to actually share their story and talk because they're scared. And that sucks. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. But that's why what we do is important, right? To be able to help more women feel encouraged to do that. So anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard for anyone. I think just getting someone to feel comfortable enough to share their story is, I'm a very extroverted person, if you couldn't tell. And I have to back up sometimes and remind myself that that's not, that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. So to be able to build enough trust with someone to get them to share that story, it's super powerful. And it's funny that you mentioned prepping people for the podcast. And I know Elena is probably laughing as well, because she knows that I am very much a fly by the seat of my pants person. So I typically actually don't do that. But I think that something that's important in terms of, how you interact with the people that you have on, whether it's proactively or during the show or both, is you just have to create a comfortable environment. I think that that's one thing that I know that I've made a conscious effort of, is trying to make it conversational and knowing that it's okay to say what you want to say and you can trust me to have that conversation with, and make it more of something that's informal, you and your friends sitting on the couch and having a conversation over a cup of coffee, something like that. So totally. I think that rather than trying to make it this really big production, building up a lot of stress beforehand and trying to make it seem a lot more monumental than, you and I talking directly to each other is very important too. So that's one thing that I would say that I've learned through the podcast. I, definitely in the beginning days, there was a lot of prep that had to go into it because I didn't know what I was doing, and who says I do now, but it's gotten much easier. And I think that just making your guests as comfortable as possible and trying to make that conversation one-on-one and feeling more like a conversation you'd have with anyone on the street than, this formalized podcast is something that's important too, just because it's something that does not come easily to most, especially those who aren't used to being on podcasts and sharing their stories. So that's definitely a really big consideration.
Yeah. And I think, sorry, go ahead, Nicole. I love how you mentioned trust, because I think the format of the podcast being so conversational, allowing for so much vulnerability, always leaning into the mental health vibe if it ever comes up, paired with the amplification and the public trust that's built on Twitter by amplifying these women, really, pulling out the best bits from the podcast, amplifying the most exciting parts of their stories. Yeah, has really positioned you as somebody that women in the space do trust. And I think the podcast has accomplished that, but also Caitlin, just the way that you represent yourself and amplify other women on Twitter has created, opportunities for me to do that, for other women to do that. And Nicole, the same for you and all the content that you put out. Like, it's really changing the way that the space is receiving these stories from women in a powerful and exciting way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in space wise, I'm thinking of what's happening in the world right now and creating that safe space for women. It's like when you look at what is going on with SCOTUS and the madness right now, and it's like very heartbreaking, but like, when 50 years of progress are probably about to be turned back, it's like, of course, women don't feel like there's a safe space. Like, of course we're scared. Of course, like, we don't feel like we should even speak up, because why should we, when it's just going to get ignored or get, turned around or whatever. So, but I recently saw Gloria Steinem speak before this happened. And wow, is she just amazing? As someone who has like seen it all, been through it, is like a godmother of modern feminism and being down to like speak up, and is a journalist who like used her voice. And I admire that a ton. She is just super aspirational. And, she says things like, revolutions are fun. Like, let's just keep going. And she's like 80 something, whatever, so that's like the positive side, is to just like, it is what it is, and it effing sucks, but like, we just have to keep going. We keep revamping. You share, you change your podcast however you need to change your podcast. I do the same for mine. Elena's building these whole like PR empires around these amazing women, and we just like keep going, because what else is there? Like, what else is there? People always like to call me fearless, and I'm like, I'm not fearless. I'm just like, what am I supposed to do? Like, twiddle my thumbs? Like, no way.
Yeah. Just do it,
Exactly.
I've really been wrestling with acceptance, like personally right now also. And I think that's an important point too, of just accepting where things are today, accepting what you know today as a woman in the space, wherever you are, if you've been here a year, if you've been here 50 years, whatever it is. And, not feeling like you are an imposter in the space because you don't know it, but rather a student, a lifelong learner, and someone who's, just always going to be there, keep driving that change. And we have to accept ourselves as women in order to do that. And kind of embrace this moment as hard as it is and keep pushing forward.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it's just being comfortable with yourself too, right? In terms of, being okay with not knowing things, being fearless, right? It's just knowing that where you're at is enough, and no one on this planet, if you think that you know everything, you're in the wrong room, right? Change spots and pivot, right? Because the entire point of not to get into like a philosophical discussion, right? But if you're not learning, what are you doing? And I think that if you're comfortable in putting yourselves in positions to be the one absorbing that information and knowing what you don't know and asking questions and being open to those conversations and diving in, Elena, especially for you, right? You got involved in the finance space and dove in headfirst. And I commend you so much for that, just because it's very easily intimidating. Any new space is intimidating, but when it comes to money, even working in the space or otherwise, that's such an easily intimidating topic for anyone that you tackled it and just dove right in. And that's something that's really hard for people to do. So, and you were incredibly supportive of people along the way, and that, people want to surround themselves with good people. They don't need to surround themselves with people who know it all. And I think it always comes back to, the character and the attitude that you bring to the table. So especially with talking about whether in finance or otherwise, and building communities and, putting yourself out there, just be a good person and look for other good people too. Right.
Totally. You're so sweet. You're going to make me cry. But I think that it's important to remember that and both of you have been, sort of the stars of this for me in a lot of ways, on Twitter at least, but just amplifying good work, like amplifying the work that you love that other women are doing, being there for your friends, hyping them up, and being unafraid to shed that positivity and allow for space for that in this very serious, as Shruti said, like very rational world that we live in, as far in the finance space. Allow really focusing on, it's not about you, it's about all of us. If I don't know something, that's fine, because this incredible woman does. So I'm just going to amplify the thing that she's doing and learn from her along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you saying like all of us kind of hits me right now, just because I think the like next evolution is, and maybe this is something I felt personally, now that I have such this female centric support system, I'm now like, I want the men to feel this, like in more so like I want them to see it, and I want them to see that this is something that's good for everyone. And that's, something I'm trying to work on with my own content. I'm going to live events now, and like the amount of people that come up to me that are men that think my content isn't for them because my backdrop's pink, because my logo's pink, because I have Beyonce gifts. Like none of this, like I don't look at a male written newsletter that's blue and go, nah, blue. It's not for me. I'm gonna move on.
Blue in finance, you'd be hard pressed to find a newsletter without it.
I'd be like in another world. Anyway, but it's just, and so I really want us to like get away from these ideologies that we just have, like, because something is written through the lens of a woman, it's only for women, or vice versa. I want to get away from that. I want to get away from us as like a society thinking that because I put an extra emphasis on uplifting female voices, that is at the expense of the male voice. And it's like literally not. It's like, if you were to actually look at my podcast, like people that come up to me and are like, oh, it's only for women. I'm like, would you just take a look for a second, please? Because it's actually very even. It's like 50-50 because that's how it should be. Maybe like 60-40, but like whatever. That's just how it should be. So that's the world
by a woman, I think even starting from that point, it just looks different, but it's really just, it's not even a different audience per se. It's just a different person delivering the message. Right. And I think we need the diversity of thought. That's what needs to change, is the diversity of thought, who we're hearing things from, how we're hearing them, what that looks like. It's better off for everyone. The more diversity that we have and the information we take in and who we hear it from, it's better for everyone. It's like in crypto, everyone always says, wag me, we're all going to make it. I mean, it's true. It's nothing, someone's benefit or someone's gain does not have to be at the expense of someone else's or a certain groups. Like there's definitely room for all of us.
Yeah, there's enough room. And that's the crypto space is, the one, and that's why I love covering the space, even though I don't do it like exclusively, although I'm pretty sure like majority of my audience is, or a large portion of it is in the crypto space, because naturally, but like, I love focusing on that arena because it is this like new, version of a financial system that is meant to be different, that is meant to be more inclusive, to have one of my friends who's like a massive like crypto kind of bro-ish, he like commented on one of my posts and was like, crypto is genderless. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And so I was like, all right. And yeah, like that's kind of the point. Anyway, so I just, it in a way, it does suck that like the messaging is getting so misconstrued. And so, yes, it takes Caitlin, it takes like myself, even like Elena, whoever you work, with on the PR side, right? Like it takes all of us, people like us to help change that messaging, because then it's just going to end up like, then this awesome innovation that is game changing is just going to end up exactly like traditional finance. And that would just suck. Like if that it's already looking like that. So we have to like change it.
And keep the mission at the center. Like for me, so I came from working in environmental advocacy at Greenpeace, and crypto being so mission driven around the whole Satoshi story really gave me something that I could connect to and understand in sort of a similar way. And I think that speaks so well to so many people who don't really understand all of the complexities of crypto, but being able to understand the story and the purpose and where it's going is something that people can really connect to from the heart. And I feel like that story is something that, Caitlin, you've done a really good job of telling and, sort of tweaking and fixing the PR problem around that. But yeah, there's definitely much work to be done.
The storytelling part is so important too, right? Because especially for something new, you have to have a good story. And that's like anything, right? If you want anything to be compelling or interesting or easier for people to understand, you have to be able to tell a good story around it, and a story that resonates with people and that makes sense. Because that really, again, keeping the mission at the center, you need to know what that mission is, and you need someone that can explicitly explain that in a way that's simple enough for people to get onboarded with. And Nicole, obviously coming with your reporter background, you do that incredibly well also. And I mean, I'm sure that's kind of at the forefront of everything you do too, right? It's always about the messaging and the story that you tell along with, whatever you're reporting on. Yeah,
exactly. Early in my career, I feel like I just really wanted to always make sure that I was bringing like a bigger picture narrative to whatever news story I was covering. And that probably comes from, I've only written about very niche industries for like trade publications. So like, I've never worked at one of the big news brands. Like it's always been very, very niche. And I mean, that has served me well, but I agree. I mean, maybe I'm a little biased, or we're all biased. But like those trade publications are the ones that actually like you're talking directly to the industry, right? And that's why like what you do, Caitlin, like On-Ramp is so important. Like you're talking to the professional, you're talking to the person, you're talking to the front lines. Those are the people that are like making the decisions, doing the things, like helping people with their wealth management, whatever it is. So like the fact that, and that's who I'm engaging with, and that's who's the narrative that I'm able to share with this like very critical audience, that almost felt more fulfilling to me than doing it for a more mainstream audience. And so that's kind of why I stuck around in like the trade and B2B media world, and why I'm still here. So yeah, but it just sucks because in behind the scenes in those newsrooms, you know, it's still very misconstrued. It's still male dominated. It's still all of the things. It's still all the things that finance is. And yeah, I mean, how many stories of like women that are in traditional roles that then end up breaking off, or you know, anyone, not just women, right? That want to break off because they actually want to be able to make a real impact. Because at the end of the day, when you're hiding or working, I mean, more so behind any kind of institution, it's going to be that institution's, especially a legacy one, it's going to be their priorities before your own. So I could only take my narrative so far until I had an editor be like, nah, or no, or this or that. Like, this is too much. You can't just say stuff like this. You have to whatever. And I'm like, but it's true. And so, yeah.
All of the compliance hoops, right?
Yeah. Well, I really commend you, Nicole, for saying the things that needed to be said, regardless of whether they would be well received by those reviewing them.
Thank you. It's definitely, it's so funny because I mean, it's not easy. And well, what ends up happening is more so like the conversations and here's the thing, when you're working in an environment, when you're the only, especially all the time, not like, it's very draining because you're constantly having to explain something and there's no one in the room that just understands. And so when there's no other female reporter in the room, no one understands. So like when I try to explain, well, women aren't owning their own RIAs because of this. And then they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense because the door's wide open. And I'm like, that's so nice of you to say. How nice is it for you to think the door's been wide open? And it's just like, yeah, try to say that to me now, dude. Anyway.
And where is the door, by the way? I'm just wondering.
I'm trying to find it. And it's like, yeah. But then now I'm having to explain this and now I'm being combated. And now it's just like, and it's wild. That's why like diversity, which that word in itself, I feel like has unfortunately gotten such a bad rep, but, you know, having just different voices and opinions and thoughts in a room, especially in a storytelling one, is so important because there's a clear difference between, you know, what an older, you know, a male colleague in his 50s or however old is, what the sources they have, the people they're connected to, the stories they want to tell are vastly different than my connections, the people I've sourced, the stories I want to tell, the narrative, the bigger picture narrative I want to share. Yeah. Anyways, so
it's hard when the onus is always on you to be the explainer and the arbiter of these truths. Yes. And I think one thing I really love that Tori said on a previous episode of Chicks of Fintwit, she's talking about how she just loves to show up in a room where every man is underestimating her and just blow their minds, right? But it's exhausting and it's hard, and it's important to kind of recognize that and give space for that while we're still pushing forward to, you know, continue creating more space. And the beautiful thing about Twitter and the femme community on Twitter is that it gives the opportunity for anybody to take control of the narrative. And so, like Desarta has said, it makes it horizontal, flat. So yes. Like you, me, whoever, like, you know, can say what we think, say what we want the industry to be. And a lot of people are engaging with that idea of what it could and should be. And it's really exciting and, you know, infusing of energy in a lot of ways, despite how challenging and, you know, heartbreaking this week in particular was.
I gotta ask Caitlin a question. So we do, for me, Twitter has mostly been positive. I've had like weird random instances where like other like male reporters from like other publication, like other trade publications in like the wealth management space have like come at me for no reason, in my opinion, but whatever. And then they like send me a DM apologizing after. It's like real great. And then they'll like ask me for a favor. Anyway, and classic. So I'd be curious, like for you, because you was like, you have a much more like, you have so much more virality and like such a, you know, a massive following that, you know, and that's different. That does set, I feel like it must set a bit of a little more like almost pressure or like, you know, especially like, you know, Bahama pics and stuff like that. And like getting like, I don't know. Sometimes I don't ever like seek to go viral. I don't think any of us seek to go viral, but like, I can imagine that it's very it's fun. You're like, fuck. Oh, sorry, I swore. Sorry. You're like,
You can swear. The podcast.
Okay, sorry. You're like, hell yeah, I'm going viral. This is great. But then on the other side, like, there's also all the negative comments that can come, or like the more invasive comments. So I'd be curious how you like navigate that, in case one day I go viral.
Oh, you absolutely will. And you definitely will. And the thing is, I talk about this often, right? Because I think it's very easy to get caught up on singular comments, right? And there's an instantaneous feedback loop on Twitter that just like you feed into it, right? And there's a reason that social media is addictive for that reason. But that being said, I mean, it definitely is a double-edged sword as your following grows, right? You could be the smartest person in the room, and especially there'll be some eyes rolling on this, but especially as a woman, it doesn't matter how smart you are. There's always going to be one person that comments on your appearance. You could put out like the most in-depth research report and someone will reply, "Oh, wow, what an ugly cow," right? Like I've literally gotten messages like that off of tweets about crypto or tweets about the markets. And you just see these replies and you know that it comes from a place of insecurity for sure. And there's definitely like, I'm at peace with that, with the number of comments that I've gotten for sure. I know that I've been very fortunate when building out my following. It definitely was never one that skyrocketed from 10,000 to 80 in a day. I'm at like, I don't know, 22,000 maybe, but I'd almost prefer that than going viral. And you get to build a more involved audience, an audience that's more of a community that you care about each other and you know what the other person's about. So I've been very lucky. I'm not really sure how I went about it that way. But I think as the following has grown, I've never changed who I am or what I'm putting out. I try to keep it personal. That's why, you saw pictures of my trip from the Bahamas. You're going to get creepy messaging, but it's not going to stop me from being me. There are people hiding behind a screen, right? And even if there's some disturbing stuff out there, it's a dark world, right? Like, I mean, not all rainbows and butterflies, but it's also not going to stop me from seeing all of the great things that the platforms brought me. And it's not even close, has been a net positive. So by putting myself out there and showing the vulnerability, it definitely exposes you to the potential for, negative things, negative comments, negative people coming after you. But if you can see through that, block, mute, whatever you need to do to keep that out of your mental, it can be really, really beneficial. So I've actually been pretty lucky in terms of, the feedback that I've gotten. A lot of the times, the more negative comments that I've gotten have been when I've gone viral and people who don't know me just see, oh, a woman tweeted this, let me knock her down a couple pegs. And it doesn't work, right? Like, it's not even an ego thing. It's a self-worth thing. And it's a knowing that, their comments have nothing to do with me and everything to do with them. And there's always going to be someone trying to knock you down when you're doing well. And you only see that more as success continues to come. So it's hard to grapple with, social media can very easily be toxic. And I've definitely fallen victim to that. I'm a human. So it's not always easy, but I think the more that you interact with it, the more that you almost get used to it, which is sort of messed up that we've normalized it, but you can only let people get to you so much, right? And you choose what you focus on. So that's what I'd say on that.
And you've kind of built that behavioral pattern, actually, Kate, of like just not interacting or block, avoid. And I think that's an important point too, of like, you have to train yourself to not engage in things that do not serve you. And especially that is true on Twitter, especially with the reply guys.
Yeah. It's preserving your own energy too, right? And your mental health too. It doesn't serve you anything really to get in arguments with keyboard warriors hiding in their mom's basement. It's not going to do anything because the reason they replied to you is to stir up emotions in you, knock you down, try to make you feel worse than you already do. And by responding to them, they're not going to change their mind. People that have strong enough opinions to be aggressively going after people aren't wanting their minds changed. They want your engagement and they want to bait you. So the more that you set rules for yourself to not engage in that, and I have been pretty strict with myself on resisting that. And that's been, like you said, setting a pattern on knowing, even if I see this, that might be like some big bait and I might want to respond in the moment and I might be heated from the comments, but it's not going to do anything. And there have been very few instances where I have engaged where it's actually been beneficial. Like it's very far and few in between on like when that actually works out for your benefit. And most of the time it's a waste. So preserve your energy and, know what to feed into and what not to. Usually the answer is probably not to do it at all.
That's helpful. And I think and I'm glad I asked, because not only was I curious, but I think a lot of women will be curious. Because I think about how many women there are that like join my podcast or I write about it in my newsletter that, maybe that don't have a big following or just getting started out. And I'm sure that it can be, intimidating. For me, it was like transitioning from just like a journalist who just shared my stories, like retweet or quote tweet, and I wrote about this today, to like actually sharing my personality. And that was at first, it's scary at first. And I had to kind of have my founders at work week, like rattle me a little bit to do it. Like, I remember my first Twitter thread I ever posted, I like covered a panel of some fintech panel I went to. And at the end, one of my founders was like, but what is your opinion? Like, what's your end opinion on this? Do you think it's this or that? And I was like, I don't have one. I just wanted to report what happened. And she was like, that is not what we're doing here. She was like, no. She's like, I want to know what you think. Like, what do you think? What is it that you thought? Do you think that it's this, or do you think it's that? Like, what was it from that Twitter thread? Like, why didn't we get like a conclusion from you of your thoughts? And that's when I was just like, oh, like that's what we're doing here. And so I had to have like a little, rattle in me. And then I had to learn how to like, especially, oh my God, there's like such a big difference between season 1 and season 2 of my podcast. Cause in season 1, I was still very much having like, I was just trying to figure it out. Right. Like I had like a very, almost like performance voice where I thought I had to be a little bit more like, I don't know how else to describe it, but like jazzier. And then I had to find the balance of like, you're still performing, a little bit, but you have to find, how do you just still sound like you're talking like we are right now, right? Like to friend, to like, you're just hanging out, and that's hard. And so I say this because I think that women can have a hard time also finding like their balance with their identities in whatever they want to preserve for themselves, and then how much you're willing to put out, for the world. In our cases, like in my case, I'm putting my full, like pretty much my full self out there. Because that's like, and that's the idea, is that if I do that, more women will be down to do that. And then also be down to, and also that resonates more with an audience, as if I'm a little bit more real. Anyway.
And like both of you have taught me that, like you have both taught me how to do that, which is why this, conversation is such a cool full circle moment with the podcast. But yeah, I think that's so important. And look at what's happened. Both of you have had such an amazing avalanche of positive, reception to you being your full authentic selves on Twitter. And I think that's something really beautiful and magical that kind of only happens on Twitter as far as social media goes. But yeah, I just really appreciate both of you for putting that out there and deciding to say like, vulnerability is cool. Let's do this. Yeah. Let's be ourselves, and let's bring everybody into that vibe with us.
Yeah, that's cool. Caitlin, the fact that I go places and people are like, you remind me of Dead Kate Bounce, or like, or like, you know what, you and Caitlin Cook, or like, really? And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I mean, being on stage, I'm on the same playing field.
It's crazy. It's, and the thing is with like putting yourself out there, it's definitely like a ladder. There's going to be a point at which someone's not comfortable with sharing something, and that's fine too. It's more of just knowing that it's okay to, if you're comfortable with that, because I think it's very easy to the point of even reporting, right, Nicole? I mean, anyone can report information. And this is why, kind of a backstory on me even getting involved in finance Twitter at all. I was in college, and my finance professor told me that there was this nerdy corner of the internet called Fintwit, and gave me a couple people to follow, said, I know you like social media. This is something you could be into. Some of the brightest people are just putting their thoughts out for free. You should try it. People are really easy to, network with, very easily accessible, like nowhere else. And I was like, all right, let me crack my knuckles here and try it out. And I went to New York City And a lot of people listening might know the folks from Ritholtz Wealth Management, and Nick Majuli, Dollars and Data, who writes a pretty popular finance blog, just published a book actually. So super excited for him. But I met him at the Ritholtz office. He became a good friend of mine. And one of the first things that he said to me was to just start writing. And my response, I just remember saying, I don't think I have anything to say. What do I write about? And his response was something to the effect of, even if no one listens, you're putting your thoughts out there. And the difference is that they're your thoughts and no one else's. And my big thing with Twitter too, is anyone can put information out there, but no one can be you like you can be you. And that's where the superpower comes in, is you being yourself and not trying to conform to this broader group, right? And it's very easy in finance with like the finance bro culture to want to be another cog in the wheel and want to conform to that. But the ones who I've seen be the most successful, at least on social media, and that's definitely a microcosm of the entire industry. And there's a lot going on outside of that, of course, but even specific to Twitter, the people who have been the most successful and happy and the people I'm most drawn to are the ones who go beyond just, spitting out data and putting out reports. They're putting themselves out there. They're putting their opinions out there, and they're really like unique in that way. So I think that it's a huge win for anyone who can. I get that it's not easy, just like going on a podcast isn't easy, or going on live TV or writing a newsletter for yourself and launching that is not easy. But if you take the jump, it's going to be probably one of the highest ROI things that you can do, in my opinion. So if you're listening and you're considering something, take the jump, right? I mean, you can always stop doing it. You can always, kind of go back to what you were doing before. But if you don't try, you're not going to know.
I love that you brought up writing too, because Twitter is like it's a form of writing now. And some people are building their whole writing careers on Twitter in a really cool way. But one of my favorite quotes from Anne Lamott, who's a mentor, role model of mine as far as authors, good writing is about telling the truth. And I think that is so important. And it's what you're saying about not just telling the data and the numbers and the statistics, but what is your personal truth with what you are sharing? And when you do that, the response is really impactful and incredible.
And I think it's super interesting and great that now these industries, finance, fintech, crypto, they're realizing that you need that element. When I was at ETF, when I was at Exchange in Miami, one of the keynote speakers was talking all about this, all about human connection. And as financial advisors, you have to be personable and all this stuff. And I can see the financial advisors in the audience. I could see them don't compute. I don't understand. And it's so funny because one, I felt really validated. I was like, hell yeah, this guy's saying all the things I'm saying. And then, but it just proves that even today, there's still that barrier of these industries that are historically very transactional, not understanding that you have to treat humans like humans and not transactions. And that, they want to know about your personal story. I mean, there's definitely people in the audience that think oh, well, my clients don't want to know my personal story or anything about me. They just want me to make them money. And it's not anymore, at least not anymore. And definitely not the younger folks that are coming in. So I'm glad to see that truth and storytelling that you're kind of sharing, Elena, to translate into these, business industries, because it needs that so badly. And so hopefully it kind of continues to resonate. I moderated a panel at a fintech event last month, and I remember in the middle of it, just shutting my notebook, my moderator notes, and being forget this other still needs to hear the fact that humans are humans and need to be spoken to as such. Me and the other panelists were let's just go ahead and go on this soapbox, because they still weren't getting it. So yeah, I think it's going to take a lot of continuous communication of this, of saying no, people want to hear from a human. No, they want to consume their content from a human. They want to, and that takes me over to, I think the massive shift that's happening in traditional storytelling, in traditional journalism. We have to say that someone that writes a story is some unbiased robot is, what? No, their name's on that story. And I bet if I find out who that person is, that they have interests, they have beliefs, they have values, they have things. So yeah, let's like stop pretending like this unbiased framework of truth telling. What? None of, like, going back to your quote, no, that makes no sense. None of it makes sense. So like it is all a part of the scheme, I guess. Like all a part of the stories that have been told to us to make us believe one thing but not think of anything else. Anyways, but that's like that's what that quote made me think of. You know, being truthful is being authentic. It's and being honest that, hey, I wrote this news story, but I am a person with beliefs and values, and I think things and I have opinions. That would be more truth telling than saying I'm completely unbiased and I wrote this story. Enjoy.
There's no such thing. And I also feel like, to your point, we've just seen every industry under the sun is like finally realizing the importance of the human aspect of things and that you can't avoid it, right? We've seen even like, you know, behavioral finance taking a much bigger position within financial services, as it should, right? You cannot, as much as you want to. We had Denise Shaw on the podcast once, and her entire career has been made from talking to traders about the fact that you cannot eliminate the emotional component of trading. You can't eliminate it anywhere. So you have to embrace it and really consider it in your decision-making process. That's how it should be everywhere, right? And especially in finance, right? People want to work with people who get them. They want to work with people who care about them and who understand where they're coming from. And it's not a transaction anymore. It's a relationship. And it doesn't matter, you know, money and making money might be at the forefront of that still, but so many people can do the exact same job. You want to work with someone who gets you. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to win out. So it's super interesting to see that come into the newsroom, see that come into content in the way that we've seen more individual influencer types coming out and sharing their opinions and people caring about that and finding people who, you know, they resonate with. We're only going to see that grow. And we've seen that in podcasts too, right? I mean, if we were just speaking objective truths, there would only be one podcast. It would just be talking about the things happening, how they are, and not giving any color, no context, just, you know, reading off of a script. But people don't want that anymore. People want to be entertained and people want to feel like connected to others. So, and rant, but super important.
Well, and the emotional aspect, or like the emotional intelligence movement intertwining with finance and this greater push towards more focus on behavioral finance, et cetera, is interesting to see play out too. And I think it also comes back to the same thought of like, we're all people. We're emotional beings, and we need to own that in our businesses and our connections with each other. Money touches every aspect of your life. I think Trudy is another guest on your podcast, is a great example of somebody who really spoke to that. And yeah, it's just, that is a big shift happening, not just in our industry, but in business in general, where we're really looking for leaders, executives, and people who have the ability to emotionally connect with each other and work in an emotionally coherent way. And you see it with like the most successful businesses, the ones that are really taking off and becoming, these huge empires are the ones that are placing a focus on their people, their culture, and that's, you know, groundwork of emotionally intelligent communication.
And that's why you have to have women in leadership roles. Okay. Seriously, speaking of, because like the amount of conversations I have, I can tell when someone is very uncomfortable with what I say. And I know I push the envelope sometimes. I've had wrinkles in my own situation by pushing it a little too far. But anyways, we're here to have fun. And without, you know, women have had to have that emotional intelligence, right? We've had to navigate it. We're just more natural at talking about it. That's less scary to us to talk about. Maybe with a mic in front of us, it's a little scarier, but anyways, but you know, I can see and I don't know if it's like, I guess it's maybe fear a little bit, but like sometimes when you talk to like men about this that aren't used to it, or you talk to an audience or moderating a panel and I'm trying to say this to them and they're like, you know, it's hard to tell if they're like, this is not real. Come on. No, people just wanted me to make money. Or are they like, oh my God, we're talking about emotions? It's because it's been something that's like been told that we don't talk about this. You talk about emotions with like a therapist, not on a podcast, not on a stage, not with a client. Like, And that is also a huge part of the problem, right? You know what? It's AAPI month right now in May, but I believe it's also mental health month. Cool. And yeah, I mean, to talk a little bit more about that aspect, I think is so important. And it is crazy how, the world I'm glad the world's shifted in a place where we are talking about it more. And Caitlin, you're so amazing about sharing your experiences with mental health. I wish I was more open about it with myself on my platform, because I think sometimes I'm like, I'm like a never-ending boat of optimism and aspiration, but like really I should also share, and I try to more now, like share my fears or share, I have massive doses of imposter syndrome that never go away, or anxieties and all that stuff. But if more people could just talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Then
but also it's a skill, right? Like I think that many people who, in the moments that you were speaking toward, Nicole, who didn't like know how to respond in that moment, don't have the emotional skills to acknowledge their feelings, label the feeling they have, process it, regulate it, and then regulate it within, the conversation in the context of you and them having a conversation. It's much easier for somebody to just say like, I, want a more emotional financial world, than to be confronted with their own emotions in a moment without having the skill set to really deal with that.
Yes. And that's why the self-reflection is so critical. And I think because as women or anyone that's different, like for me, as someone that's like biracial, I have always just been like, well, why didn't this person accept me? Or why didn't this group accept me? And then I have all these like anxieties and like, I don't understand. And I'm like, what did I do? Do I smell? Like, and it's actually, and then I end up being able to like really reflect deeper into, oh, maybe it was this aspect of me, or maybe it was because I'm a woman, or maybe this. And I think our world tells us like, nah, people don't do that. People don't discriminate you because you're a woman, or because you're Asian American, or because you're all these things, or because you're young. No. That's the one the young one is actually the one that has been hardest for me. Probably one of the harder ones is trying to tell myself like, no one's being like this to me because I'm young. But in reality, they are. And sometimes it takes enough you have to be so self-reflective and accepting of the world isn't as, wonderful all the time as we hope, or people aren't. I like to believe the best in people. And that is like, sometimes it's your like biggest flaw and also your biggest like benefit as a human. But like, you have to be self-reflective enough to say like, no, that person, discriminated me because of my age, or they treated me a certain way because of my age. So
the age part, constant. Yeah. And even and the thing is, it's like a lot of that's not spoken, right? And it may not even be purposeful, because like it's so deeply embedded in like society, right? The ageism, the racism, the sexism, right? I mean, these are deeply rooted issues that we have to put a conscious effort towards to solve as a society, right? And it's never going to be perfect. It's not going to be something to, not sleep at night over, right? You can't change people, you can influence them, but that's about it. But it's definitely real. It's definitely something that happens quite a bit. And I'm 24. I had to think about that. But I that's something that, you have to face as well, especially putting yourself out there generally, right? I mean, we're all young, but putting yourself out there and, there's that added layer of complexity and, what people see. So not to say not to do it, definitely still put yourself out there, but it's not always easy. It's not always sunshine and rainbows and butterflies either. So, I definitely say that.
And it can be better to just accept that. Like, It's easier on me to just accept like, oh, this happened because of my age. This happened because of X. And then you can move on. Cause that's been the big issue is like, we haven't been acknowledging the problems. Instead, we're like, no, people are good. They don't do this. And they're not always good. But anyways, for the most part.
And I guess what I was, connecting with like the emotional skills is like, if we give more people those skills, then they can react better, Nicole, in those moments where you're expressing things that are super vulnerable about discrimination that is totally not okay. Mm-hmm. And for someone to not really be open to that moment, it's hard to give them grace. But I think collectively, like we just need people to be more emotionally capable of responding to those instances in a way that's compassionate, loving, honest, and acknowledges the part of it that's not as shiny and wonderful as some of the other things that we talk about and do.
Right. If anyone's going to do it, it's going to be our generation. All right.
Let's go.
Us three, our Gen Z zillennial mix here. That's the ones that are going to do it. Yeah, no, Gen Zers are so emotionally intelligent. I'm like, they inspire the hell out of me. So
it's definitely a good part of our generation as a whole. Maybe not everyone, but collectively pretty decent.
The ones I meet are like, yeah, my little cousins that are like in their early 20s, like, or 19 or so. Yeah, they are just unreal. My little cousin, okay, real quick, one of my little cousins like just went through a breakup, and she's like, I'd really love to get your advice on it. And if you have the emotional space to accept, what I want to share with you. And I was like, oh my, no one has ever asked me that in my life. Thank you. Like, thank you for asking if I could even take your baggage with like what I'm dealing with. And then anyway, so that was just, I liked that. I want to do that from now on when I ask someone to asking someone if they have the space to take on your like baggage before you share it with them, which is really, really cool. And no one has ever asked me that.
Kids are cognizant of emotional labor. It's amazing.
The kids are all right. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good shift that we've seen too. And honestly, like even in my podcast too, it's like you try to get people to be vulnerable, right? They have to be willing to share that, and they need to be comfortable, and they obviously need to be in the mental place to do that too, right? So definitely something to be cognizant of in like those conversations, and definitely consider that. We should probably get wrapping up here, I suppose, on the last Chicks of Fintwit episode, but which is great. I'm excited. It's not a goodbye. I'm just getting started. You can't get rid of me. So, there's been a lot of really, really great guests, Nicole included, Elena now included as well. So I'm super glad to have had you on. For anyone listening who was a guest on the podcast, or anyone who listened, thank you for even listening to me. It blows my mind that anyone, is willing to hear me ramble on at all, let alone weekly. So if you've ever listened to the podcast, you're listening now, thank you. And for giving me a platform for that. I always told people I would do this if no one listened, just because I love to talk to people and hear their stories, learn about them, what makes them tick, and just more general curiosity than anything else. But hopefully other people have gleaned something from this and have met some really cool people in the process. At least Elena and Nicole are a good example of that. So someone met someone, right? But, I'm looking forward to the future. I'd be curious to hear both of your favorite guests from this podcast. Nicole, you cannot say yourself, although I would see why you would. And I can start too, just because I had so many. I don't even know if I can pick one. Obviously, Nicole's up there. That's why she's here. But Tracy Alloway, I'm a big, I don't fangirl people because I feel like people are people, right? And even anyone who's good at one thing, they're people and human, and so I try not to do that. It's a lot of added pressure coming from the other side and the receiving side as well, I think. But Tracy Alloway, have always fangirled her. She's at Bloomberg and runs the Odd Lots podcast and newsletter with Joe Weisenthal. So huge fan, was able to have her on the podcast and just had a great conversation. You don't really get to interview the interviewer very often. So that was really fun. And there's so many others, but another one that I really, Bobby, our producer in the background here, giving him his flowers, but there's been guests as well that I did not know before recording with them. And one of those was, there were actually quite a few, but when we're talking about the early days of hedge funds and whatnot, I was looking for a guest for the podcast and actually spoke with Dominique Miel as well, who was one of the first women in hedge funds. Really, she wrote a book called Damsel in Distress and had really no context going into that conversation, and she was incredible. So that was another one. But of course, every single conversation I've had has been incredible, and I'm very thankful to even be able to have an audience with any of these people that I've spoken to. So it's kind of like trying to pick your favorite kid. It's just not.
Yeah, really I know. Right? Oh man.
I want to just the Dominique Miel, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. That episode, Caitlin, was really impactful for me when she was talking about how a lot of people end up in finance serendipitously and not really by way of choosing that route. And that was so how it happened for me. It was kind of a product of COVID, job shift, et cetera. And that serendipity can really lead to finding a true home here. And as a woman, that is possible, even in a really male-dominated space, like being the first woman in hedge funds. So her story was just incredible, and I think is such an important one for any woman to listen to who is entering this space. I know you said you're going to keep all the episodes on Spotify. They're all still there.
Yep.
So I also would just say, like, anybody listening, if you are new here, go listen to Caitlin's, Chicks of Fintwit every episode. It really will help you to understand so many different aspects of the industry. And yeah, I have so many favorite episodes. Nicole is, of course, included. And I loved how the verbiage of that, of like, fintech will change the world. And then you had this amazing, fun, transformative conversation. And then Nicole launches into workweek creator mode and, sails off to the stratosphere. And then the one with Tori too, of just really getting super into, again, the emotional aspect of being in a startup, being a woman, working in finance, how to build your girl gang and your, support system around that. These are just such valuable conversations that women need to hear. And I am so grateful that we have them on the record. And also, shout out to your guests, shout out to you for having them. But it was a fantastic run. And I would say the Chicks of Fintwit are here to stay, regardless of whether we're having another episode.
Amen.
I'm excited. I'm excited for your new chapter. Me coming on, I came on the show like really, it was maybe like a week after I like announced that I was leaving my last job and doing something new. I hadn't even launched with the fintech yet. So who knows? You could have been you might have been my secret sauce there, like my right. I'm just getting into season 2 of my podcast, so maybe this is like, and I came back. This is on your show, so you're gonna be my like lucky charm that helps my podcast take off.
Here we go.
yeah, that's good. But I mean, so many guests. I'm really big fan of Kayla Kilbride. I think she's so cool, so interesting. I love her TikTok. Perth Toll, I got to meet her in real life, just amazing, and I really resonate with her story. I don't even shout it out to Robert Pizarro.
Petruzzo. Raleigh.
He's from Raleigh. I know he's from Raleigh. I've interviewed him myself, not on my podcast, but I've interviewed him. I've written a story. I actually interviewed him after that NFT vending machine went viral. That was kind of fun. But anyways, I'd even shout out, I know he's not a chick, but hey, this is about humans, right? This is about everyone. And so I'd even shout out him because I think that, the work that he's doing is really just interesting and very cool. So I'm really big fans of all 3 of those people. But yeah, just excited to see you continue to take off. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have a name yet? Oh, wait.
I do. Yeah.
Earlier.
With my Twitter branding and the way that I've sort of renamed myself inadvertently through 1 second of thinking of a Twitter handle, I think it's going to be called the Dead Kate Bounce Experience, because you're going to get full Caitlin, whatever I want to talk about, mostly crypto, right? Because I'm definitely have a focus there, but we're going to take it in a different direction a bit. So I'm really excited. I think that's kind of fun. I'm going to build out a Dead Kate empire, I've decided. Okay. So it starts now, I guess. And we'll keep everyone updated on, when we get started. I have some guests in mind if they're willing to chat. So we'll get the ball rolling here really soon.
The empire is alive and well.
The empire is striking back, as they say. May the 4th be with you as we're recording this. It's perfect.
Wow.
But I guess I want to wrap up here, but this was a great way to end it with 2 of my favorite ladies that I've met from Twitter. And honestly, thank you both. I mean, none of this stuff is possible without support from people, right? I mean, I think I would have given up a long time ago had I had no traction, no support, no, friends that were building in this space and learning in this space as I was, and just having that friendship has been invaluable to me. So obviously not going anywhere, but just want to give you guys your flowers on that. You both mean a ton to me, and we need to meet in person because it's just getting weird at this point that we haven't. But just thank you for that. Thank you to everyone for listening as well. Again, thanks for keeping the ball rolling with this, and thank you for listening. Hopefully you've learned something, and we will be back with a new podcast coming soon. Super excited for it. So keep an eye out, and we will be back with you shortly.